Some people didn't grow up surrounded by noise. They grew up surrounded by space. Empty rooms, quiet afternoons, long stretches of figuring things out alone. And when you grow up like that, your brain adapts. You stop expecting immediate help. You stop waiting for reassurance. You start solving problems internally. At first, it looks like independence, maturity, strength. But over time, something else forms. You begin to think differently. You calculate risks quietly. You trust yourself more than anyone else. And without realizing it, you build a world that doesn't require anyone. When no one consistently steps in, your nervous system learns one rule: handle it. Homework? Handle it. Fear? Handle it. Confusion? Handle it. You become emotionally efficient. You don't panic easily, you don't ask twice, you don't depend quickly. This creates resilience, but it also creates distance. Because asking for help starts to feel unnatural. Not weak, just unnecessary. And when you carry that into adulthood, relationships feel different. Not because you don't care, but because your default setting is self-contained survival. When you grow up alone, silence stops feeling uncomfortable. It becomes familiar. You learn to sit with your thoughts without distraction. You replay conversations internally. You predict outcomes before they happen. While other children look outward for feedback, you look inward for answers. That creates depth, but it also creates self-containment. You don't need constant validation. You don't need noise to feel stable. And later in life, when people panic in quiet spaces, you remain calm. Not because you're fearless, but because silence has always been your natural environment. When emotions rise and no one is immediately there to regulate them with you, you learn to regulate yourself. You swallow tears faster, you reduce visible reactions, you adapt quickly. This builds composure, but it also builds caution. You become careful about how much you reveal. You measure vulnerability before expressing it, because early on, showing emotion didn't always change outcomes. So your brain optimized for efficiency. Feel it, process it, move on. And over time, that internal processing speed makes you appear strong, even when you're simply used to handling things alone. People who grew up surrounded by consistent support often default to trust. But when you grew up managing your own uncertainty, trust becomes selective, not cynical, just careful. You don't open immediately. You observe, you analyze, you watch patterns longer than most, because your safety never depended on someone else's consistency. It depended on your own stability. So in adulthood, closeness isn't rejected, it's evaluated. And that evaluation process can look like distance, but internally, it's simply calibration. You learned early that reliability matters, so you don't hand it out lightly. When self-reliance forms early, independence doesn't feel empowering. It feels normal. You don't think of yourself as strong. You think of yourself as prepared. Prepared to handle disappointment. Prepared to solve problems alone. Prepared for plans to change. So when relationships demand emotional risk, your nervous system compares two options: depend or adapt. And adaptation usually wins. Not because you fear people, but because depending on someone else requires unlearning the system that protected you growing up. And unlearning protection always feels riskier than maintaining control. There's a quiet advantage to growing up alone. You become an exceptional problem solver. You don't freeze easily. You don't escalate quickly. You scan scenarios calmly. Because from a young age, you had to anticipate outcomes. If something broke, you fixed it. If something confused you, you researched it. Trial and error wasn't optional. It was normal. That builds competence. And competence builds quiet confidence. But sometimes competence becomes isolation. Because when you can solve most things yourself, asking for help starts to feel inefficient, even when connection would be healthier than control. Large groups can feel overwhelming, not because you're antisocial, but because you're used to mental autonomy. You don't crave constant interaction. You don't seek noise to feel secure. Your baseline is internal dialogue. So social environments require energy budgeting. You observe more than you speak. You calculate before you respond. And people sometimes mistake that for detachment. But internally, you're processing deeply. You're measuring dynamics, reading tone shifts. Growing up alone sharpened your awareness. It made you perceptive. But perception without expression can make you appear distant, even when you're fully present. When conflict arises, your first instinct isn't escalation, it's containment. You're used to solving tension internally. You don't immediately seek external reassurance. So arguments often feel unnecessary. You analyze silently. You detach slightly. You stabilize yourself first. This makes you calm under pressure. But it can also make others feel like you're emotionally unreachable, because your processing happens privately. You learned early that emotional storms don't always bring rescue, so you built internal shelter. And that shelter still activates whenever instability appears. People who grew up with constant support often value reassurance. But if you grew up alone, you value capability. You respect people who can handle things, who stay steady, who don't collapse under pressure, because that's the language you understand. Competence feels safe. Consistency feels reliable. Emotional intensity, less so. This shapes your relationships. You may gravitate towards stability over passion, because early life taught you that emotional volatility requires energy you'd rather conserve. So you choose grounded people, not dramatic ones. You're not incapable of vulnerability. You're strategic about it. You don't open because the moment feels emotional. You open because the pattern feels consistent. You test reliability before revealing depth. This isn't coldness, it's risk management. When you grew up learning that self-sufficiency protects you, exposure feels optional. And optional things are evaluated carefully. So while others may share quickly, you share gradually, layer by layer. Trust is earned through repetition. And once someone passes your internal threshold, you're deeply loyal. But reaching that threshold takes time. One unexpected result of growing up alone is tolerance for misunderstanding. You're used to handling your own narrative. If someone misreads you, you don't always rush to correct it. Because external validation was never your primary fuel. You built identity internally. That can look mysterious, reserved, but it's simply autonomy. You don't need everyone to understand you to feel stable, and that independence of perception is rare. It makes you resilient. But sometimes it also prevents the kind of connection that requires mutual clarity. There's a thin line between strength and isolation. Growing up alone builds one, but it can accidentally create the other. You don't lean easily. You don't depend quickly. You don't collapse publicly. That's powerful. But humans are wired for interdependence. So while your independence protected you, it may also limit how deeply you let others in. Not intentionally, just habitually. Your nervous system still defaults to, "I've got this," even when sharing the weight would make life lighter. Here's the truth most people don't see. Growing up alone didn't damage you. It trained you. You developed foresight, emotional regulation, problem-solving ability, situational awareness. You became adaptive. That's rare. And when balanced with openness, it becomes powerful. The goal isn't to abandon independence. It's to integrate connection without losing self-trust, because you don't need to unlearn strength. You just need to realize that allowing support doesn't erase resilience. It expands it. If you grew up alone, your mind was shaped by necessity. You learned early that stability comes from within, and that lesson stayed. But adulthood offers a new option. You can remain capable and still allow closeness. You can be self-reliant and still receive support. Independence doesn't have to mean isolation. It can mean strength with choice. And maybe the most powerful shift is realizing that being used to doing everything alone doesn't mean you still have to.